Typically, these deceased children were sent in parts to not raise suspicion, as parents may notice their entire child missing, but they may not notice their child missing a leg if they are not able to view the child's body in its entirety.
Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if you're new. Without wasting any time, let's get to the video.
Crazy conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. The gay bomb. While we're on the topic of the big gay, I have one more for you. That being the gay bomb, which was a non-lethal chemical weapon theorized by, surprise, surprise, the United States military, specifically the Air Force. This bomb's purpose was simple yet strange. It was meant to be dropped over enemy territories, spreading a chemical mixture in the form of gas that would turn enemy troops essentially homosexual. This hypothetical weapon was confirmed in a 1994 Department of Defense document, where it spoke of a hypothetical weapon designed to dispense sexual pheromones among enemy forces to generate mutual attraction. Now, initially, I thought the military application would be that the soldiers would just be too busy loving on each other to get any fighting done, but that wasn't the case. It's actually a lot less interesting. Supposedly, the entire point was to cause confusion and panic amongst these troops, reducing their effectiveness in battle. Picture this. The year is 1993. You and your friend are sitting on the couch watching the movie Sniper, which just came out, when all of a sudden you say to your friend jokingly, I bet the US government's probably thought about making bombs that would turn the enemies gay. You and your friend have a chuckle and continue the movie. However, the following year, you are hanging out with the same friend again, and instead of watching a movie, you are doing something that every teenager does, reading a Department of Defense release, when all of a sudden you see actual confirmation that the US Air Force was contemplating a gay bomb. After reading this, you're shocked, and you look your homie in the eyes and can't believe that your silly little joke was true.
I'm trying to imagine a group of scientists sitting somewhere and discussing about making a bomb like this, and they actually think that it might work. Those were crazy times back then, but it was in the 50s, I think, and I do wonder, like, what were they thinking, when they came up with this? But yeah, y'all tell me what you think.
Project MK Naomi. As I said, Project MK, I'm sure the word ultra was the first thing that popped into your head. And that's because most people know about that crazy true conspiracy theory. And for that reason, I wanted to add something a bit different. Project MK Naomi was actually the successor of MK Ultra, and was a collaboration between the CIA and the US Department of Defense. And it went on for almost 2 decades, from the 1950s to the 1970s. The entire goal of Project MK Naomi was to gain a deeper knowledge on chemical and biological warfare weapons, specifically to determine what substances would kill people and what chemicals would do what to people. Once the CIA and Department of Defense had a list of chemicals and a list of reactions ranging from irritation all the way to death, they then started focusing on unique delivery systems for these chemicals, most notable of which being dart guns, specifically dart guns either filled or having their tip coated with these specific chemicals, with one of the most famous examples being the heart attack gun, which was, like you may have guessed, a gun that shot a dart at a target that would, shortly after injection, cause a heart attack in the victim, making a very intentional death seem accidental. And it's no doubt that these weapons would have been very useful for spies, especially during the Cold War, when tensions and the need for a good spy was at an all-time high. And if you're for some reason unfamiliar with Project MK Ultra, it's basically the government using LSD on non-consenting individuals to try to test mind control, as a very basic elevator pitch. But I'm assuming most of you are aware of that one.
This is my first time hearing about Project Naomi, and it makes me wonder, what other projects were there out there? And to think they used their own people. And if you know any other stories similar to this one, now feel free to put it in the comments section.
USA's fake Cuban attack. This video is quickly taking a very dark turn, but that's kind of how these lists go. In 1962, during the Cold War, the US wasn't just tense with Russia, it also had growing tensions with its southern neighbor, Cuba, specifically because Fidel Castro had risen to power in Cuba and was a rather large proponent of communism, or at least kept a very good relationship with Russia. During this time, the US experienced the Cuban Missile Crisis, which simply put was Russia putting their nukes in Cuba because the US had put their nukes in Turkey and Italy. This situation was scary, but it was resolved safely. However, the US did not forget, hence them coming up with Operation Northwoods. The plan suggested that the government would carry out a series of fake terrorist attacks on the American military and civilians, to then blame Cuba for these attacks and then justify going to war. Some of these crazy actions that they planned on doing to their own people was hijacking planes, sinking boats, and even bombing US cities, all done intentionally to point the blame at Cuba. But this wasn't just a get back for the Cuban Missile Crisis. This plan was part of a larger effort to oppose Fidel Castro's communist government, which was aligned directly with the Soviet Union, the USA's enemy at the time. And with the Soviet Union having an ally so close to US soil, the US was feeling the heat. Although, would that have justified any of these actions? I don't believe so. That being said, fortunately, none of these actually happened. Although it's not because the government had a change of heart and realized this was awful. President John F. Kennedy simply rejected the plan because he thought that this would cause a large-scale war against Russia, which he deemed to be too risky. Regardless though, none of these horrible attacks injured any innocent people, which is great. And nobody even knew about it until 1997, when the documents were declassified and made public. So yeah, although the government didn't sacrifice its own people in the name of war, they definitely heavily considered it, which is definitely concerning.
I wonder how many people are involved in this, and it's crazy to see what kind of lens the government will go to try and, to win a war. And I don't know a lot about the Cuban Missile Crisis, so if you have any recommendations when it comes to books or other channels where I can look into this, feel free to leave them in the comment section.
The US government poisoning alcohol. It's no conspiracy theory that from 1920 to 1933, the US government banned alcohol, hence this time being known as the Prohibition era, as alcohol was literally prohibited. But besides passing laws and regulations to ensure that no alcohol was being produced or distributed, the US government also took a few additional steps to really deter people from consuming alcohol. What the government chose to do was add methyl alcohol into industrial grade alcohols to deter human consumption. It's theorized that the government assumed that having these deadly poisons in this alcohol would cause some of these illegal consumers of alcohol to pass away, deterring these bootleggers to sell their product as it was killing their customers. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and the bootleggers continued to sell, and alcoholics continued to drink. And unsurprisingly, as a result of this, many people were poisoned and died. And in 1927, in New York alone, there was over 41 deaths confirmed to have come from alcohol poisoning from tainted alcohol, specifically the methyl alcohol. The government used this strategy up until 1933 when the Prohibition ended, and it was at that point confirmed that the US government was literally poisoning alcohol, as it was recorded as a strategy to curb alcohol consumption. So yeah, the US was intentionally putting deadly chemicals into products that they knew that people were consuming. I find this one a bit interesting because although people weren't supposed to be consuming this, the US government knew that people were going to consume this. So the fact that they intentionally put deadly chemicals into it, to me, is a bit concerning.
Of all the ways they could have done this is what they chose to do. And I wonder how many people were involved in doing this, because it wasn't just a small group of people. I really doubt they got caught, but I'll look more into this, and see what really happened. And it's crazy how far the government would go, just to try and stop people from drinking, which is counterintuitive, because to do that, they thought it was was a good idea to poison them, which is even worse. But you guys tell me what you think.
Project Sunshine. Fair warning, there is a reason why this entry is at the end of the list, and that's because it is by far the most morbid subject in this entire video. Project Sunshine is also known as the Dead Baby Project, and that alone should give you a small glimpse into the insanity that is this conspiracy theory proven true. Project Sunshine was a secret research project that was launched in 1953 to study the effects of radioactive fallout on human health and the environment. Already off to a bad start. The focus of this radioactive testing was specifically on strontium-90, which is regarded as the deadliest byproduct of nuclear detonation. The United States Atomic Energy Commission aimed to measure the amount of strontium-90 in human tissue, as it was typical for it to accumulate in human bones, specifically in children's bones whose skeletal systems were still developing and most vulnerable. Now here's the thing, as much as they potentially would have wanted to subject real children to strontium-90 to study the side effects, they were not able to do so, as it would be a huge moral dilemma, and definitely wouldn't fly well with the general public. So what they did do was researchers gather over 1,500 human samples, primarily consisting of babies and young children, without the consent or knowledge of the families that they were taken from. These 1,500 adolescent cadavers were not originally from the United States, and were actually from countries like Australia and the UK, and were acquired by some pretty disgusting means, specifically preventing parents from examining their deceased child before they were sent away for nuclear testing. Typically, these deceased children were sent in parts to not raise suspicion, as parents may notice their entire child missing, but they may not notice their child missing a leg if they are not able to view the child's body in its entirety. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is extremely dark and honestly disgusting. The initial studies on strontium-90 only analyzed the effects on the human remains. However, shortly after, it expanded to studying its effects on natural environments, such as soil, grass, and grazing animals, where they were seeing what the effect of this strontium-90 would be as it ascended up the food chain. I don't think it'll serve as much as a surprise that once the practices of Project Sunshine were exposed, they were met with widespread outrage and even resulted in a stricter ethical standard when it came to scientific research, specifically those involving human subjects, dead or alive. It literally sounds like something your crazy uncle would say at Thanksgiving dinner. Hey, can you pass the potatoes? Yeah, here you go. Oh, did you know that in the 50s, the US government was actually essentially stealing dead children from overseas and using them to test the dangerous byproducts of nuclear fallout? Oh, crazy. Honestly though, it sounds too crazy to be true, but one thing I've learned from researching for this video is that, unfortunately, some things are too crazy to not be true. But anyways, that's all I got for now, guys.
Imagine someone telling you about this, you wouldn't even believe it. And this makes you wonder, like, how many things like this were happening back then, or are still happening, things we'll never know about. It makes you think. And thank you guys for watching the video, and he has a lot more content like this. And, I'll be leaving his channel name and link in the description, so if you want to watch more of his videos, you can go there. And thank you guys for watching, and see you guys in the next video.